you are responsible for this decision. I'm accountable for it because I'm the CEO, but ultimately you're responsible for the technology. And I will trust in you until you give me a reason not to trust in you. But I have to empower you to make decisions so we move. And I think when you create that, you build other leaders. And I always felt that if you build more leaders, not based on titles, down the line, whether it's the supervisor, the manager, the person who's doing walk-in, the person who's coming in the morning, dealing with some of the maintenance, if you make them feel empowered and also you treat them respectfully, you greet them, you show the humanity, you're courteous, you in there, you will get a lot more in terms of moving the dial.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today I'm very honored to have Lawrence Eta, a very seasoned global technology leader with extensive experience in driving innovation and transformation across multiple countries: Saudi Arabia, Canada, and the United States. As far as I know, I'm sure there's more. He's a thought leader and a best-selling author, and he excels at bridging technology and leadership and public service, which is a very rare combination, while navigating very diverse cultural landscapes all over the world. Thank you for being here, Lawrence.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. It's great to be here and be with your audience. Thank you so much.
Of course. So, Lawrence, let's start by learning a little bit about your journey. How did you get to where you're at? From where you started to becoming the CTO of City of Toronto, and now you're in Saudi Arabia. Tell us the journey. How did this come about?
Yeah, so I was born in Nigeria, in West Africa. I went and I was educated up till the age of 11. Then I moved to the United Kingdom, England specifically, all the way to my undergraduate there, my Bachelor of Science in Technology Management, diploma in Business Information Technology. Worked for a couple of years in the UK in the retail industry, great leadership program for a couple of years with Marks and Spencer's. And then I moved to Canada in 97, worked with an internet service provider, the telecom industry, various other industries. Moved to California, around where you are, not more in the Bay Area though. Worked for a .com there in the early 2000s, very start of when voice over IP, we would call it, was coming around. Worked on there and then moved back to Canada, Winnipeg, Manitoba specifically, and then moved to Vancouver, just outside Vancouver, and then landed in Toronto, first as the Deputy Chief Information Officer of the infrastructure. And then I came there in 2017, and then in 2019 became the CTO, was the CTO till 2022. And then I moved to Saudi Arabia to head the digital of one of the mega projects. And now I'm in the Middle East, in Riyadh.
Wow. That's one hell of a journey. Let's talk a little bit about the day in the life of a CTO for a major city like Toronto. I think it's probably top 10, largest cities in the world, definitely North America, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's the fourth largest in North America. 2.9 million people. Behind, you got Mexico, New York, LA, and then Toronto, the most diverse. So a day in the life, I had the privilege to have a team of people of about 700 to 800 people in various components of technology. And when I became CTO, the role was actually Chief Information Officer. Then we transitioned it to Chief Technology Officer because we wanted to send a message that the position was also tech focused, had a tech background, was in technology. So I would call the day in the life as anything from, I use the analogy of a pest, P-E-S-T, political in terms of dealing with elected officials, making sure that their message, their mandate is being assumed, a mayor position, councillors. Also working with 44 heads, we call them division heads. So everything from the GM of water to the transportation to all levels of government. Toronto was a big city, so I was one of those 44 heads. And then obviously managing and leading in terms of my direct reports, deputy CTO, directors, big technology infrastructure serving 45,000 employees. Those 44,000 employees are serving 2.9 million people. Also having, working on economically, the big budget, making sure the budget is aligned, the taxpayers' dollars are moving the mandate, strategy, um, sponsoring a lot of big projects in terms of delivery of services to the citizens and residents, working on that, digitizing the environment, modernizing the environment, stabilizing the environment, scaling. Also, half of the team were union, also dealing with the union workforce as well, making sure that people feel collaborative, they feel that they're empowered. About 3 data centers, which we eventually will move into 2. So, very big mandate. So, a day. And also, you really needed to know how to manage the stakeholders in terms of working with your colleagues, working with the elected official, also dealing with the press, dealing with the media. You had to be able to communicate to the media, and a lot of issue management, risk management, a lot of audits, making sure that things are running accordingly, dealing with audits, dealing with accountability officers, dealing with freedom of information. People want to know what public officials are engaged. And then once a month, I'm going to various committees in public. So General Government License Committee, which is the committee that ran technology, managed by councillors, then going to the mayor meetings for briefings, and then also go into the whole elected council. So it was a big mandate. So imagine what we did was essentially take a CIO position, a city position, a customer experience position, a smart city, all collapse under the accountability of CTO. So yeah, very big mandate.
Ooh. Lawrence, how do you take a role like that? Working for a city comes with a lot of diplomacy, a lot of frankly politics, a lot of red tape. How did you find ways to actually move the needle and actually get stuff accomplished? Because I mean, in big companies, very little is accomplished a lot of times. Now you're talking city, right? And how do you balance the need to deal with all the politics while pushing the envelope and making an impact technologically, because that was your mandate?
Correct. I think part of it as well, I mean, it comes to the fundamental of leadership. You've got to make sure the right people are in the right roles, a standard in any industry, private, public sector. So make sure you're hiring and you're putting people in the best position to be successful. Then understanding you actually need very strong financial acumen, which means is that you've got to have a good handle on not just accounting, but handle in terms of how city finances work to move the needle. So what budget you have, what areas you have that have responsibilities, discretionary, and also knowing from a governance standpoint what authorities you have, right? Which has to go in terms of to local council, which have to bear. So understanding that sort of political environment, understanding the economic environment, and then being really good at building strong relationships. Diplomacy, as you've mentioned, patience, thinking before you speak, knowing that you are essentially representing the brand of the city and that you are speaking there. So you have to be very calm. You've got to ensure you take your time to really be thoughtful, but at the same token, keep up with how fast the technology is moving. And importantly, recognize that cities are not the private sector. We're not in the business of making profits, generating revenue. We're in the business of ensuring that there's trust and confidence to the citizenship. So with that, once you have that, and for me, I have methodologies and principles that I use to guide me through that decision making, and surround yourself with really good people who have the best interest of public service. We're there to serve the public, and recognize that you're not going to take it personally. It's hard, we're humans, but at the end of the day, we're there to serve. So I think that you need grit, you need a strong mindset, and you need to ensure that, unlike in the private sector where you see incremental movement, and those incremental movements then build to really big things. In public service, a small movement that can actually provide value to the public is where you measure your goals. So you don't measure it on sort of, I'm going to transform so large, because there's procurement, there's process, there's red tape, there's those things. but you measure it as that what decision am I making that can have impact? And is that impact making a change in the lives of the people that you're positioned to serve? And are the politicians, as a good public servant, are you meeting the mandate of why they were elected? Because ultimately, you're working for the service of the people, but the people elect them. So if you understand your role and you understand what you're trying to contribute, then you take the wins and and the losses, you try to look, there's the next day and you push forward.
Nice. Lawrence, one of the key things that changed technology and how products are pushed out, is agile versus waterfall, right? Failing fast, making iterative decisions. Perfection is the enemy of done. Let's push it out. Let's see. Let's get feedback. Let's make adjustments. It isn't life and death. All of these concepts. Did any of those apply in a role like the one you had, or was the things you just mentioned to me preventative of having truly agile methodologies implemented?
Well, innovation is about failing fast, rinsing, repeating, you go again, right? It's very difficult sometimes for that to occur in large governments because essentially there's a lot of criticism. So as long as the failing is measured, you have to, and this is where political acumen comes about. So I'll give an example. When I joined in 2017 as the deputy, we had 3 data centers and we were very much focused on premise. So building, it was the time before you had a lot of software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platforms as a service, without getting too heavy technical. But I came out and I said that we should push to the cloud. And I started having a cloud strategy. And it was initially met with some skepticism. And that went into a lot of things with, what are you going to need for jobs, etc. But I knew that to create value, to bring in new skills, I had to sell the message to the workforce that this was something that was going to ensure that they could learn something new. So, and that would be innovative itself. And innovation is not invention. So in government, it could be ensuring that you take a process that takes 10 steps and you make it 3 or 4 steps. That's innovative. So in public service, you've got to redefine what innovation means. And you've got to ensure that you communicate that in a way whereby it may not be so tangibly seen straight away. But if I can digitize the process to make the red tape, as you mentioned it, a little bit more transparent and move quicker, then that could be innovation. And then some projects will waterfall. Some projects, for example, if you're building technology or you're building really big infrastructure that has utility services, it's going to take a length of time. So it is difficult to sort of fail and to innovate very quickly because you have a large workforce and you also have various aspects that come into making sure the workforce feel that they are being empowered and that's happening. But I looked at, as long as there was incremental movement that solved one part or some parts of the system, I may not be measured by the whole aspects because I need the business, I need the other divisions to contribute. But how am I bringing certain modernized technology? So we went the data center, we went to the cloud. That's innovative. That was innovative for government in 2017. It's very innovative. We wrote certain policies that were able to try to move the decision-making process a bit faster for us. We ensured that the public, we really took the role. The CTO role became very public. I made the role public because I felt that it wasn't just behind the scenes. So we started talking a lot more about tech, the power of tech, dealing with modernization. For example, in the pandemic, we digitized people who were going to apply for burial services, which was something they would go in person. And in the pandemic, no one was going into person in the counter. So you look for quick wins that are small, but also can demonstrate you're trying to be as innovative as possible in a very large organization.
Sure. What were so what was one of the most successful tech initiatives that you were able to to get across the line, and what significant impact did it make on the people, I guess, because that's really what you're hired to do.
Yeah. So one of the aspects was that it may seem like it was an enterprise system. So at the time, believe it or not, we were still using Office 365 so we have 44,000 people. 11,000 were those were sort of office workers, and we were running everything on premise. Now, to some who are listening to this, they're like, well, that's older. But for government, it's a big infrastructure to keep 11,000 people connected and thousands of people on that sort of platform, bringing collaboration tools, bringing all those tools. But getting that contract to be passed by the councillors, it was big numbers financially. So we had to tell the story. We had to do lots of briefings because the investment was high. So we did that. That was very important. Some may say, well, just make a decision. I didn't have the position needs to go to the elected officials. So first we had to get the budget approved at a very large investment. Then we had to start looking how we can actually achieve that by building and implementing that. So to some, that's a very important, significant component in modernizing the infrastructure of the technology, or necessarily bringing certain services online, permit systems online, ensuring that those permit systems can be digitized. That becomes very significant because a lot of government is still in a non-digital format, especially in the West. So that was very significant. Another initiative that was really important was something called the Digital Infrastructure Strategic Framework. We wanted to send a message. We built sort of a roadmap of any technology coming into Toronto needed to fall in certain principles. It was social, economic, environmental, privacy and security, equity. Just writing documents alone to be adopted by 20 plus politicians to allow you to implement and get everybody. And so we always had a unanimous agreement. We spent a lot of time in consultation to make that. So there is the tangible measure of tech, and then there's the intangible to enable you, whether it's the budget or the policies to implement the tech. So those were sort of the example. And in the pandemic, we were putting services online. We took 1,000 people in a bad snow day could access the city remotely before the pandemic. So out of the 11,000 workforce, 1,000 could log in because people were always coming into the office. In 6 weeks, we took 11,000 people online.
Amazing. Made them
in a pandemic. So
most cities are very behind. Like I live in the city of LA, and anytime I want to build a little home or whatever, the simplest things you have to go to the city, right? For
correct. In person.
Small little permits. I can buy $1 million home without ever seeing it, but to get a small permit for an expansion or something, you got to go to the city and wait in line, and then there's no guarantees of anything being accomplished, and it feels like you live in the 50s. You know what I mean? When it comes to this. So I'm glad someone's working on that. Lawrence, let's fast forward a little bit. You were adventurous enough to be, you were headhunted and recruited to move to Saudi Arabia. So I want to know about that because I think the Middle East, specifically the Gulf region, seems to be really stepping on digitization and really innovative technology initiatives. I want to know kind of what you're doing there and how is it different than what you did at City of Toronto or in any other role?
Well, I'm actually going to start first with a non-tech aspects in terms of the speed of transformation. Because in the West, we are a democratic system, so things take a bit slower because you've got to build consensus and build consultation. You've got to talk. You've got to make sure people. Out in the East, in the Middle East, it's a monarchy-based system, so the government is setting the direction. So number one, things just move faster based on the governments because essentially the direction is set and you're moving a lot quicker. And so that's usually done with a certain decree that's given. So that's very fast. I'll give a specific example. One of the areas in Toronto that I was very keen to do was called Municipal Broadband Network. The city owns fiber. Most cities own fiber, which that means is your traffic lights, your systems, they're owned by fiber optics. It's called dark fiber. I wanted to ensure that we were building what we would call a neutral host. So one telecommunication provider would dig the roads, put the fiber. So we didn't have everybody digging. It's called the dig one policy. Dig once, put all the utility services in there, power, electricity, close up the roads. But part of that, I wanted to offer that service to also small, medium-sized businesses to maybe build businesses, internet services provider. That's very difficult to do in the West. Here in this region, the government has ownership in the telecom and sets the direction. So you can mandate things. You can mandate collaboration faster. Another component is that all government entities must share data in a private and secure way. What that means is that the citizens and residents see government as providing a good experience. Your permits, you can do online. Everything is done on your phone. That cannot happen if you're not sharing data. So when I was in Toronto, the pandemic, we had 44 heads, 44 areas. It's very difficult to share because there's different legislations and different principles to protect and to that. So when the federal government, the state government in the US, or the local government cannot share data, you can't deliver good experiences. And I'm assuming that data is going to be private and secure. Another thing the West has is technology debt. There's a lot of silos. There's infrastructure built as the 50s, a long time ago. But in this part of the world, they're literally starting greenfield at a minimum, where it's a start. Yeah, so which means is that you can set the governance, you can set the infrastructure, you can build the strategy, and you can build upon that. And it can move quite quickly in terms of the decisions because government is the one investing and driving the transformation. So really what differentiates it, it's not the tech, because the technology can be found. The technology is everywhere. It's the governance structure, the decision making, and the way that you need to move at the pace of the political environment. And also, you could have a whole new elected officials come after 4 years and they have a different mandate by the people. So you can't invest for the long term. Here, they can invest for 2030. They can invest for 2050. So you have consistency. Here, you invest in 2 years, 4 years, and then you have to try to hope that the plan still stayed the same. You convince new sets of people because the world is changing, the mandates are different. So you're stopping and starting. So your roadmap is hard to define. You define it for 3, 4 years. You may have to pivot in changing in terms of the direction.
Especially with politicians shifting, right?
Correct. And it's the way the democracy is. So here you can still pivot, things move in different direction, but the vision, the strategy is still the same. It's 10 years put in place. We know where we're going, how we get there. So in the conversations is not the why. The conversation is how are we going to do this? So your energy and your effort and your resources are focused on the how and not focused on debating the vision or debating the why or debating is this the right direction or debating is climate change real or debating do we invest in digital or technology or debating is this the right return or it's like we're into digital, we're into technology, we're into diversifying our economy. How do we get it done? How do we bring the best expertise? What is the finances needed to do that? And how do we measure? And one thing that's really here, their key KPIs, everything is measured on progress, not perfection, progress. How are you moving the needle? So culturally, I see the changes to where I came from.
That's huge. Lawrence, this reminds me of an EOS process, which is like a system of running a company. There's a concept called IDS. So you identify the issue, you discuss it, and you solve it. 80% of the time, you end up in the D, which is discussing, or in this case, you mentioned debating. So what ends up happening is very little is accomplished. And so when, I've noticed that because we provide engineers for hundreds of tech companies. The large companies get very little accomplished because of the things you mentioned, the silos, the lack of direction from the top, because these companies become very democratic, like a country, like a state, and people can choose not to collaborate. So you really put a lot of clarity on why that happens beyond the obvious phrases like, oh, it's political, it's bureaucracy, red tape, all that stuff is, they're nice, but you have to understand what's behind it. And for me, the reason small companies thrive is because it's smaller and someone is dictating it. Once you end up getting a little bigger, what I've noticed, companies that are 200, 300, 400 people now try to become more democratic, and they bring in a few wrong leaders. I've noticed very few things get done, and that company ends up dying because they're acting like a cruise liner, like there's some big political company, but really they're just just a boat. So they need to continue being a speedboat. So I see a lot of difference. I don't know if you've ever worked at a startup or a smaller company, but this is really ringing true to just companies. Forget about countries and states and cities and municipalities. I mean, just companies, period.
Yeah, and I put the analogy is that if you can't all fit into an office or a boardroom, say there's 6, 8 chairs there, if you need any more chairs, you're going to have stagnation sometimes because you're going to have a lot of people with a lot of opinions. And so you see some companies in the private sector, they will then want to spin off. They've got so big, but they're not innovating anymore, right? Sure. So they'll spin off from the parent company, make them some subsidiary, give them some authority and a way to go and maybe bring the ideas back. So there is life cycles of either products. You build a product, sure, and you want to sustain it. But if you truly want to move, this is where also it falls into another analogy that I use a lot called the RACI, which is standard. The first thing I'll do in meetings, I'm very clear on who is responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, because not all of us are going to be responsible. So I'll give an example. Not all of us are going in front of the mayor or the elected officials to explain a problem or explain what went wrong. It's accountability. So that decision making, you want to be informed, but sometimes people think that if you don't have clarity of roles, you're not sure about who's making this decision or who are you consulting to make this decision. So that's what happens sometimes, the debate, and it's trying to get consensus. And sometimes you may not get consensus. You may get healthy friction, healthy conflict. That's okay.
Which is fine.
But sometimes, yeah. but smaller startups, they're in the mentality they have to survive. They have to get to that round of funding. They have to ensure they demonstrate revenue, right? They're constantly dealing with pressures, so which makes them very good at decisions. Now, whether the decision is right or wrong, but at least they're making a decision. But when you get big, you get comfortable, you get safe. If you're a big company, you've got a bit of a cushion. You can raise money. You can maybe have some level of previous success. And we see many big companies, even in the past 10 years ago, that are no longer here, just because many that have not kept up. So you almost need that sort of mentality, but it comes to culture, because the more people you have, then there's a people management aspect. So what happens is that the job becomes people management, and you've got to balance how you're building people in big teams, leading people, but also how do you innovate and move quickly? And it's delicacy. It takes leadership expertise to manage all of those things.
And a strong, confident leadership, because, when we look at the world, without getting political, we look at it as you're either a democracy or you're a dictatorship. And what I'm learning from you is it's actually not the case. There is a third. Obviously, a democracy sounds wonderful on the surface, but very few things get done, and it's very, very flawed. Dictatorships obviously are horrific most of the time, right? They keep the people down, nothing's getting done, and this includes companies. But you talked about this monarchy, right? You talk about a lot of these Gulf states, they're monarchies, and usually most of the companies are owned by the handful of cousins of the monarchy, right? And a lot is getting done in these countries. Now, obviously, they got their own issues, and human rights isn't always the best, but I think I see some things that are headed in the right direction. So it's interesting to hear from you, because companies are similar. As a leader myself, sometimes it's tough because I don't want to make every decision. I want my leadership team to make a lot of decisions, and usually that's wonderful. Sometimes it's not because things aren't getting done, because there's a lot of conversations happening versus moving the needle. Right. What advice do you have for most
Yeah,
of people like us, right? We're running companies 20, 30, 100 people, 200 people, and we don't want to be dictators. It's too stressful and it doesn't feel good, and we want people to eventually replace us. So how do we balance those two things, the need to move the needle and make an impact and drive revenue and grow, and the need to have people make their own decisions and feel ownership?
yeah, it's a good point. I'll just sort of set a bit of a viewpoint whereby I think that with a lot of the difference, after living in so many countries, of course, this is the first time I've lived. This is the biggest change I've made. There is also a very powerful element where knowledge and information, a lot of people just don't know what's happening in other parts of the world. So they assume in terms of a leadership style is based on what they hear in the media or the press. And in some cases, maybe that's true or not true, but there can be biases that come into that, certainly in that respect. I think that when it comes to certain things of rights of people, I can tell you this, living in this part of the world, it's the safest place I've ever lived. That's leadership. It's the most digitally advanced. I've lived in many places. And the key piece is that the rights of the people, I see people here that are very happy in all sectors. Now, everywhere, there's nowhere that's perfect. I'm sure but also within a democratic area, there are human rights there that are not being respected in many of these countries as well. I can give a whole litany. So if I factor that in then to the business in terms of the private sector, it comes down to the fundamental thing is that in a monarchy, if you have a benevolent leader, you will have actions that is caring about the people. Because any monarchy wants to ensure that the people are respecting them and the people feel that they're thriving. And you can't keep people continuously held back because that will create tension. It will create issues, right? So in an organization, the key, I always used to call it in Toronto, I would say, I want labor peace. Because without labor peace being that a healthy workforce, you're not going to move any needle. All the leader is going to do is spend time resolving issues, or maybe they're going to start then making very heavy, in your words, decisions of dictatorship that is just not healthy for anybody. Because the leader can't be in you can't be in every meeting, you can't be in every conversation. So you have to empower people. But to do that, you have to give people sort of guidelines about where their authority and their strength and their expertise, which comes into key methodologies, as I've mentioned. Like, you are responsible for this decision. I'm accountable for it because I'm the CEO, but ultimately you're responsible for the technology. And I will trust in you until you give me a reason not to trust in you, right? But I have to empower you to make decisions so we move. So it comes down to, in any country, in any organization, what's the culture that you are trying to create? Do you want to create a culture of fear? Do you want people to fear you? Which fear is not a sustainable model. They may fear you, but how long is that going to last? Or do you want
They'll
to
fear
create
you
a
until they
culture?
throw you out of power.
Thank you. Or till
Right.
the board, or to your board exactly
Uh-huh.
decides, or the rest of your investors decide that it's time that they need a change because just nothing is
Sure.
getting done. So the style is that I want you to respect me, but let's be very clear who's accountable. But I want to empower you to be able to make good decisions to move to the next stage. And I think
Sure.
when you create that, you build other leaders. And I always felt that if you build more leaders, not based on titles, down the line, whether it's the supervisor, the manager, the person who's doing walking, the person who's coming in the morning, dealing with some of the maintenance, if you make them feel empowered and also you treat them respectfully, you greet them, you show the humanity, you're courteous, you in there, you will get a lot more in terms of moving the dial. And more
Sure.
importantly, you will get a lot of advice. Because the person on the ground sees what's happening and not happening. And if they trust you, you will get more information about what are the
Great.
problems to fix, and then you can make some of the decisions, or some of your leaders can make some of those
Sure.
decisions.
Let's talk. Thank you. That was great. Let's talk a little bit about smart cities and the future of urban tech. Like, what's your vision at any of these smart cities, and how do you see AI and IoT and other emerging technologies playing a factor in our lives the next 5, 10 years?
I think it's huge. I mean, IoT, Industrial Internet of Things, we have that. It's sending data, sending information in a secure way that allows us to make real time decisions, the ability to um, impact and focus. For example, one of the things that we're looking is building a single source of truth, pulling data from the city to be able to ensure emergency services, transportation services. It's insights. That's very important. AI, of course, I mean, there's lots of discussions in it, as long as it's done in a non-biased, in an ethical way, is helping us move to automation, more knowledge walking, bringing jobs that will be higher skilled, hopefully higher pay, and bringing the mundane task that we don't need to be involved in anymore, moving that to an automated fashion. So we focus on better decisions that bring more insights and the accessibility of data, very, very important. The next thing that I really see is that one of the things we've really seen that is now coming sort of back is the fact of blockchain or trust layers, as they call it, which most of the people will associate that with crypto or certain aspects. But it's really about using technology to create that improved process. So you mentioned the permits. Imagine now if I could send you an electronic format, you can sign, the person you're selling the house to or the person who's buying the house from you can go on a trusted sort of layer, technology layer, agree the contract, sign it both ends without having to leave your desk, and then deposit the payments. So that's very important. Fintech is becoming very important. Traditional banking is moving more into some of this digital payments, digital wallets, the ability to pay. When I come back to North America, it's very rare that I'm taking out my physical credit card. I'm using my phone to pay. I'm using my phone for a boarding pass. So it's all about how does the experience move quicker. The next thing that I really think is something to look at is quantum computing. As computers get really super faster and faster, quantum computing will process things at the speed, very fast speeds, which will mean they can analyze more data, they can look at things more intelligently. So that's a really big frontier. Augmented reality, virtual reality, and some of these new sort of worlds, which in the branding used to be called the metaverse, the marketing name has moved on. But it's really also about engaging in terms of virtual, digital twin for cities. Before you make a construction decision or before you make a transportation decision, before you invest money, imagine a 3D virtualization of how the new construction would be. You put it in the meetings, you put it in the board meetings, you put it in the elections meetings. You start to say, if we move it, how do we zone it? That happens in 3D, and then build that into the workflow of construction. So you have much more reduced risk as opposed to, oh, we didn't build it right, now we've got to. So digital twin, augmented reality, virtual reality, quantum computing, blockchain, which is focused more on the trust layer in terms of how you're moving digital contracts, fintech, digital payments, artificial intelligence, automation. So there's a lot that can happen. But the two things that are very important is about sharing data in a secure, trusted way and private that doesn't expose that, and also ensuring that a lot of the legacy technology are being modernized in the cloud. It's very difficult to do this in all. So without those foundation pieces, you're not going to get there. And making sure there's a lot of richness in telecommunications. In North America, it's not really an issue. There's good fiber, there's good cellular coverages, but in some of the other countries, the ICT, the telecommunications, the interconnection is so critical, because if you're in certain countries and certain, not even in the West, if you're in rural communities and you don't have internet access, you can't participate in this digital world. It's just physically impossible. So investing in telecommunications is very, very important in that respect.
How far are we away from assuming we can get to level 4 or 5 autonomous vehicles, where we in the city with all the logistics and infrastructure can just get in our cars, and basically I'm imagining we're driving and the lights will go green or red based on traffic conditions, not by timing or whatever. And these cars basically drive themselves because the city is created in such a way where it can, right?
Right.
How far do you think we are from that?
Well, the technology is there now. The issue is that in some of the developing cities, does the legislation and the regulation catch up? So I was in the Bay Area, San Francisco, a few weeks ago, and I saw autonomous vehicles doing pickups in a smaller radius, but I saw it in real time. It was happening. So it's there, but obviously you have to ensure it's safe. It's there, it's very hard to do that sometimes in brownfield cities. So cities that are fully developed. So in answer to your question on greenfield cities, which means cities that are starting from scratch, as long as you have the digital architecture. So I'm very focused on make sure the architecture is set right, make sure the data is available, make sure it's interoperable. And that's why I have this principle. It's called the 5S. Stability, make sure the technology is stable, make sure the technology can scale, make sure the solution is integrated, make sure it's sustainable and secure. So those are the 5S principles. If I was designing in a new city today, that's the vision of how I have worked with my colleagues here in the Middle East to develop the digital strategy for the megacity that I'm working with, an architectural blueprint, telecommunications, applications, data layer. So as long as you build it in that architecture, which is everything, then you have a greater chance of not 20 years or 10 years down the line, you're reverse engineering. You can continue to modernize. So for a lot of the cities out in the developed, in the brownfield cities, they weren't built in that way to be smart cities, intelligent cities.
Sure.
It just wasn't the format. But for greenfield, which is one of the reasons I wanted to come to this part of the world, it's a lot more accessible when you're starting from scratch. So the technology is there. It's just that the policy, the regulations, the governance, those are the things that has to be very much thought about, because once you start building it, it's very hard to reverse it if you don't get the foundation right at the first time.
Do you feel like we need to get to a more developed AGI before we can get there?
I think
general
so.
Intelligence, right? Like artificial general intelligence. Do we need more of that?
Yeah, we need more access to where is the source of the data, because without the source of the data, AI is nothing. You can't, so if the data is siloed, the data is not it's not interconnected, and we have technology from a long time ago written in C++, COBOL, like old technology.
COBOL, wow.
Yes, and actually in the pandemic, I was seeing in the US where they were call out of COBOL programmers to come out of retirement.
I remember that. AS400.
Do you remember that?
Right?
AS400.
I actually do remember that, yeah.
Yes, and so the key is that are those people still around? I mean, are they still around? So if we have big systems that are powering not just government, but powering private institutions, the banks, those areas that are written in 40, 50 years, it's very hard to pull the data in the right format. So what we have to do is that when we're coming to now new things that are being built, we've got to ensure that we're using modernized technology. And often that proves challenging because there's a budget, there's a financial conversation, there's taxes, and that whole process. So it's really about the data, the single source of truth. Where is the data held? Can the data be accessible? If the data can be accessible, then it should be able to interconnect, interplug with any. And that is my view is how you would probably get to AGI first.
Lawrence, tell me the 5 S's again. I've got stable, scalable, sustainable. What are the other two?
So it's so you've got the right first two: stable, scalable, solution. So it's a solution integration. The tech solution needs to be integrated. Then it's sustainable, which is going in the cloud, or at least ensuring that it's in that, as I said, infrastructure as a service. And then it's secure. You've got to wrap it around security. Very secure, cyber security, but it's physical security, virtual security. It's all very important. So yeah, those are the 5 S's that I
Lawrence,
use.
let's talk a little bit about your book, Bridging Worlds, right? That journey of technology, leadership, and public service. Tell me a little bit about what that's all about, what inspired you to write it, and what's a quick summary of it.
Yeah, so it starts off with a memoir of me being as 11-year-old, leaving home. So leaving Nigeria, moving to the UK, and sort of the journeys of some of that cultural diversity, awareness, change, moving from a place where I was a majority, everybody looked like me, and then suddenly I'm a minority looking that, and going to a boarding school. Going to a boarding school that felt like Harry Potter, and trying to adjust and survive and thrive in there, all the way then to my tech journey, and then moving out of the United Kingdom to Canada to US, etc. And some of the lessons I learned along the way. I wrote a book that I thought, if I was a younger Lawrence, if I was that 11-year-old Lawrence who is having aspirations about wanting to be the chief of some big organization, startup, whatever it is, what would be some of the lessons learned? So, on each chapter of the book, I talk about certain lessons learned. So that it becomes, as well as a narrative, but it actually becomes something practical that could be doing. It talks about leadership. It talks about navigating the senior positions. It talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It talks about the public service. I have certain viewpoints on modernize the public service, as some of it we've discussed in the Western context anyway. It talks about leadership. It talks about building teams. It talks about the 5 S's. It talks about the nuance of the pest, and not politics in terms of politicians, but politics in corporate politics and knowing how to thrive. So the book I really wanted to be was a journey into bridging worlds. It's called Bridging Worlds because I've lived in many places. I want to bridge the East to the West, to the continent of Africa. And it focuses very much on my time in Toronto, in my 5 years there, and that journey, and provides that information so that people can grow if they want to look at to be in the next positions, provide methodologies, as I've spoken about, the 5 S's, the PES, the RACI, about how to utilize these tools. And it can act as a mentorship or a sponsorship, and a little glimmer into my life as well, and some of the decisions I made in my career to end up being, to be very honored to be in the position that I've had in my career in some of these leadership positions. Yeah.
Lawrence, where do people get the book? Is it on
Amazon.com? Ships there. If you check Lawrence Eta Bridging Worlds, you can see a copy of it just behind me right now.
Oh, nice.
You can sort of get it there. So it's on Amazon.com under my name. It ships internationally. And also they can follow me as well on lawrenceeta.com, my website. I have a newsletter. I have posts that come out quite regularly in the content of AI, fintech, the digital economy, artificial intelligence, and just constantly putting out content there, and also on Instagram that really talks about different aspects of tech leadership and leadership in general, and policy and the public and the private sector, the role of the private sector, the role of diversity in terms of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and ensuring that the leadership team is representative of the people you're serving. So it can be found on Amazon.com. Thank you.
That's great. Definitely going to pick that up, and I am getting your newsletter. Lawrence, question for you. You've worked in so many different diverse environments, and not like you worked in 7 Western countries. I mean, these are very different countries: Saudi Arabia, Canada, United States, United Kingdom. What's the one thing or one or two things that you've learned about leadership styles across these countries, and if you were to summarize them, if you were to take the best from each country and throw away the worst, like summarize it for us, what would it look like?
The technology is the same in all of these countries. The key piece is the cultural nuance. So one of the first things is getting to know, it's EQ, emotional intelligence. Learn about the people, learn about their cultures, learn about the way they do business, learn about the way they actually interact with their society. If you build that first before you deal with the tech, you will move a lot faster. Because the fundamental thing is that out of all these countries I've walked in and the different cultures, it's simple. People want safety, they want security, they want good opportunities, and they want to ensure that you are creating an environment that they thrive in. It doesn't matter where you are. It's the same thing. We're all human. Now, what gets lost in that is that how we approach it can be different. So the one thing I've really learned is that when I arrive at places, I really lean into the emotional intelligence. I lean into the people. I try to get to know them. I try to get to know their custom, their culture, their food, their environment. I try to build those relationships. And then the walk, you've built trust, you've shown a supportive area, and then the walk will happen. Culture first.
That's really, really good advice, Lawrence, because one of the things that a lot of these countries, especially in the Middle East or smaller countries in Europe, whatever it is, they don't want you coming in as the big bad wolf from a much more advanced country. I'm going to show you developing people how it's done in the modern world, right? This is how we're going to do things, like I'm some savior here to save you. They don't want to hear that. And a lot of times it's not even accurate, right? It's not even accurate. So for you to go in and really care about the culture and get to know the culture and understand their pain points and what they care about, then you can make good decisions, legitimate, scalable, sustainable, secure, safe decisions. So I really, really like that, Lawrence, because that could be, I feel like that could be done across the board. Any company, any leader of a new leader in a company even comes in with, swinging, and they're making decisions day one without talking to anybody. It usually does not go well,
It doesn't.
And so
Absolutely.
good leaders usually spend some time, whether it's a week, a month, a year, depending on the size and scope of the company or the city or the country, getting to know the people and the challenges that they face and the opportunities that they're looking for. So I really like that.
Exactly. And humility, because all the things you've just mentioned and we've talked about speaks to being humbled. Because when you come in, your fundamental thinking should be you're there to serve. They're not serving you. You're there to serve them, empower them. So if you come in with humility and say, what can I learn? I'm going to bring some ideas, but also what can I learn from you? For example, I don't speak the language here. What can I learn? How do you greet? You're curious. Why do you, greet in a certain way? What you'll find is that people will shower and support you. They will give you the attention. They will give you the respect because they are having a viewpoint that you are authentic and you genuinely care. So not to dial it in, you've got to genuinely be interested.
You gotta care. No, this is not faking it. You gotta actually care, otherwise you're in the wrong role. So humility versus hubris every time.
That's right. That's right. I'm not coming, as you say, I'm not here to save. And as I told you, the country I'm in is the most digitally advanced country I've lived. And I'm the former CTO of the City of Toronto. So if I come with that attitude saying, for example, you have digital identity, everything is done on your phone, you can find out information, you get on your phone, you can pay a lot of your banking in real time, you get a parking ticket, your identification everything is on your phone. So I can learn from that. And what is the source of that? Well, we centralize data. Okay, I see that. Then how did you do that? Okay. And why am I here? Well, I'm here on certain aspects. I can complement your technology with some of the leadership. I can complement with helping you ungovern. I can complement with policy. I can complement with assessing the right technology that fits into your cultural landscape. And I don't need to come here from a Western viewpoint thinking I'm coming to save you, but I'm coming to contribute. And together we can build this city as a united force. And that, I find, gets you a lot more open doors to have the conversation and to feel that you're part of the transformation that is occurring at rapid pace.
Brilliant. Brilliantly said. Too good of a point not to end on. So we're going to end on that point. Guys, go pick up Lawrence's book, follow him on LinkedIn. There's a lot to learn. Him and I spoke for an hour before even this podcast, so I'm very impressed by your long-term mindset. Thank you for being here, Lawrence. Been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time and opening up the conversation to your audience.
Appreciate you, Lawrence. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.